I am just so pleased, and it is such a pleasure to rise to speak to the Equal Opportunity Religious Exceptions Amendment Bill. And I have to say, I feel like we're all on the same page. I mean, everyone's saying, no, we love everyone, we don't want to discriminate against anyone, we don't discriminate against anyone, everything is fine. So in that case, what's the problem? Why maintain this exception if we don't need it? As I hear from people who, for some, almost undisclosed reason, they are opposing this bill, because we are all talking about love, we are all talking about equality, we are all talking about fairness and freedom, and yet people are opposing this bill. Now, just as an aside, before I speak to the bill, I actually, in my lunch hour, went to the opening of a powder room. Now, this was a delightful thing to do in my lunchtime. Yes, Mr. Ondarchi, it was the opening of a powder room. And it was at a club, the Kelvin Club, which was the first club to actually accept women as members. And that was 26 years ago, almost to the day. And the way that and so this powder room actually had significance in that club, because there had never been a female toilet in the Kelvin Club until 26 years ago, when they accepted female members. And that was because they could discriminate against women, because they could, and many clubs still do this. But it shows the changing nature and a changing nature of our society, that would seem absolutely daft that you would have a club without a women's bathroom, because they had no women coming to that club. So 26 years ago, they changed that. And this is an important change. This is also an important change. This bill narrows that outdated carve-out that actually does cause harm. I note that many people were saying it doesn't. Well, it does. It does cause harm. It causes real harm, particularly to our LGBTIQ plus community, particularly to our women and to girls. You know, every person, and as we have heard from everyone in this chamber for or against this bill, every person in this deserves fair and respectful treatment when they go to school and work and when they're seeking support services. So these carve-outs, as they stand today, allow faith-based schools and organisations to discriminate against people on the grounds of their sex, their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their marital status, their parental status. Really? In 2021? We want the right to do that? I was surprised that anyone would oppose this. I thought we would have been home by now, because that just seems bizarre in 2021 that people would want that right. And, you know, I'm listening to Mr. Finn, Mr. Ondarchi, Ms. Barth, all talking about, respect and agreement. And there's no problem. In fact, the one point, I think some of the previous speakers were saying, there's no problem. We don't use it anyway. So why change it? Well, why have it? Why have a carve-out that says that some people are less worthy than others? Because that's what this carve-out does. This carve-out says that it's acceptable, and that these others do not have the same rights as I do. They do not have the same freedoms as I do. In fact, I should have this innate freedom to discriminate against them. It's my belief, it's my freedom, and I should be allowed to discriminate against people. Well, no, actually, no. And in fact, you know, it goes both ways. We have protections from discrimination on the grounds of religion, and this bill enshrines that as well. Our Equal Opportunity Bill enshrines that. This bill will limit religious exceptions under the Equal Opportunity Act. and it reintroduces that inherent requirement. So I would say this is extremely sensible, this is extremely balanced. Currently, the Equal Opportunity Act has broad exceptions permitting religious bodies to discriminate on the basis, as I said, of religious belief, sex, sexual orientation, etc. Now, this bill will not actually close the ability to discriminate, just narrow how you can discriminate, how you can treat others differently. So it will narrow the ability of religious bodies and schools to discriminate in employment. It also narrows the exceptions for religious bodies that are state government funded. Now let's remember, this is talking about government funded organisations who want to have an exception from the Equal Opportunity Act. They're happy to accept the taxpayers' money, but they'd like to refuse services, they'd like to refuse employment for some taxpayers. This I find quite extraordinary. I find it quite extraordinary that anyone would want to defend that right. And I know that, you know, we've all received many emails asking us to support this or asking us to oppose this, but I think one of the most important ones that I received, and I received many from religious organisations saying, I don't know why, we've never used it, why would we have this? We don't need this, we don't need this exception. In fact, we don't think it's right. In fact, we don't think it's Christian. We do not think it's fair, and, you know, it's not what our doctrines, what our beliefs say. Our beliefs say treat everyone equally. Our beliefs say treat everyone kindly, treat everyone with respect. So why would we want this exception to treat some people without that same respect? But apparently we do. Well, I don't, and I want that to change. And so does the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, now a magnificent organisation. And they have written to, they wrote to the Attorney General that I was fortunate to be CC'd in, and their acting executive director, Dr. Lucia Boxlayer, said, we strongly support this bill. This bill ensures that religious freedoms that allow people to practice their faith are balanced with the rights of all people. We therefore urge all members of Parliament to support the proposed reforms to the Equal Opportunity Act. Well said. Well said. Why would we have an Equal Opportunity Act that actually carves people out, that says that some people are more equal than others? Some people should have more freedom than others. When I've been listening, and I have been listening to the contributions from everyone today, I keep nodding my head and saying, yes, I totally agree with you. Love is love. You know, we should be allowed to love anyone. We shouldn't discriminate. So why are you defending this right to discriminate? And let's be clear, this is not, as Mr. Finn might say, about closing schools, about banning religion, about the end of religion as we know it. This bill finds a balance, and it's a balance that I'm, reluctantly comfortable with. Religious bodies will still be able to discriminate on the basis of religious belief in schools, workplaces and service delivery, as long as it's reasonable and proportionate. As long as it's reasonable and proportionate. Why would you want anything else? Why would you want anything more than being allowed to discriminate on the grounds that it was reasonable and proportionate? And in the case of employment, that it's an inherent part of the job. Religious bodies will still be exempt from discrimination laws when training, educating, ordaining or appointing religious leaders or members, or when selecting or appointing people to participate in religious observance or practice. Now, that seems incredibly balanced. That seems to be finding a balance. Now, I don't think this bill is perfect, but this is the last day of sitting. So I'm not going to try and change this bill now because that would delay the passage of this very important piece of legislation. But the Human Rights Law Centre Dr. Luke Beck, Equality Australia and many others have said that this bill could be strengthened by ensuring that students cannot be discriminated against on the basis of religion after admission to a school. It could also be improved by removing the distinction between government and non-government funded services. And that is actually quite a key point in this, that this exemption still applies if you are not government funded. So religious organisations, religious charities still have the right to discriminate and be a bigot and, treat other people less equally if they're doing it on their own dollar. Their own tax-free dollar, that is, the dollar that they don't have to pay tax on. But as I say, there could be improvements, but today is not the day for that. And I certainly support Dr. Ratnam's amendments, but I would like to, I suppose, take on the motto that so many of us have had to, well, the motto that I probably say most days in this job: don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. And this is good. I also think it's very important that we draw this line in the sand before we see the so-called Religious Freedoms Bill, the much touted Religious Freedoms Bill, which is the freedom to be a bigot, the federal legislation that fortunately still hasn't seen the light of day. One wonders if it will. But our federal government currently is seeking to undermine these important values, rights and freedoms. The federal bill proposed takes away rights from people who are currently protected under our anti-discrimination law. To think in 2021, in federation, that we would be overriding anti-discrimination legislation in our states, to think that we would be doing this, I find it a complete anathema. I hope it never sees the light of day, because that religious discrimination bill takes away existing anti-discrimination protections, including on the grounds of race, religion, sex, marital status, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity or intersex status. Employees, students and people accessing goods and services may not be protected under our very own laws, because the federal government and the federal legislation doesn't only override our legislation, it redefines our legislation. And that is quite extraordinary, to think that a federal government would want to rewrite state legislation, legislation that has gone through legislation that has gone through a state parliament. To be able to this proposed federal law that may protect a boss, a colleague, a doctor, a taxi driver or another service provider who says to a colleague, student, customer or client, homosexuality is a sin. Disability is caused by the devil. Every child should have a mother and father who are married. God made only men and women. God made women to obey men. HIV is a punishment from God. People who don't believe in Jesus can't get to heaven, or all people who believe in Jesus are idiots. It goes both ways in the freedom of religion. What sort of community do we want to live in, where we find it acceptable to be horrible, to insult people, to denigrate people? That's not the society that I want to live in. That's not the reason I'm in this parliament. It's actually about seeking equality. It's about seeking kindness for all and treating everyone equally. And that's what this bill does, because we really shouldn't be having exceptions in discrimination legislation. I mean, this is about equal opportunity, and why would we exclude some people? Why would some people be more equal than others? So I commend this bill. I'm very certain and pleased that it will go through. I hope that the federal legislation doesn't go through. I hope that we never see the day where we allow federal governments to rewrite state legislation. I hope that if that was ever to occur, that this state would fight that this state would defend its right to make its legislation for our people, for our community. So I'm very pleased that this bill has made it to this House before the end of 2021, and I commend the bill.